Welcome to the Christian Principles Podcast. I'm Matt George. Mark and I are honored once again to be visited by Dr. Maggie Pope, and you are in for a treat as we have this discussion concerning biblical worldview. The Christian Principles Podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation, but bear in mind the views and opinions expressed here are those of the hosts and not necessarily of the Herzog Foundation. Don't let limited budgets or IT staffing make your staff vulnerable to common cybersecurity attacks like phishing and social engineering. One of our past guests and friend of the pod, James, has offered 3 listeners' Christian schools 3 free virtual training sessions. These 45-minute video conferences will personally cover critical topics like email security, password best practices, and online safety and privacy. Email us at mark@christianprinciplespodcast.com and tell us why your school should be a part of these free sessions. We are pleased once again to have Maggie Pope with us and getting into this conversation with biblical worldview. It's not that hard to say, actually.
I'm happy to be here again and hanging out with you guys. Thanks for having me back.
And before we keep going, Dr. Pope, we have to ask, as we usually do, are you okay with us dropping the doctor formally from the title of your name so we don't have to also call Matt great grand supreme potentate ruler over all?
That would be fun to listen to all session, but yeah, I'm good. I'm totally good with you dropping doctor.
I was just going to say, as soon as somebody says, no, let's keep calling Matt that.
Yeah, we're in trouble.
That's going to be a terrible time.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us following along with us on Spotify or YouTube, where you would see this long-form content in video, you'll notice that we actually have, again, this episode pulled up in front of us, something, and this is a PDF from Summit Ministries concerning the biblical worldview development that would go on were a institution to partner with Summit Ministries in their school. And there was a quote that when we were reading through, Maggie, I just had to stop and to take note of, and then I wanted to ask you about it first as a jumping off point. So, again, we know that you work with Summit Ministries and specifically partnering with schools and helping them build their biblical worldview, which for our listeners, that's, this is who we're trying to go for, and we want their ears on this podcast. And the quote is this: Christian school leaders are essential to efforts to create an environment immersed in biblical worldview. So Christian school leaders are essential to efforts to create an environment immersed in a biblical worldview. Like a foreman tasked with stewarding a building project, leaders answer a most worthy call to cultivate an environment ideal for human flourishing and biblical worldview formation. I imagine we can talk about that first part till the cows come home. But at least for now, could you use this as a launching off point? Why are you here? Why Summit does what it does? Why specifically you coming on our podcast and talking to our listenership, to Christian school leaders? What?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'll start with a little bit of what Summit's about. Summit is all about equipping the next generation. And when we think about schools and we think about the next generation, we think about all those really little guys, or maybe not so little guys, that are sitting in those seats staring back at us as teachers or walking through our hallways. But what we've found is that there still is kind of a little bit of a gap out there when it comes to equipping the equippers. So the school leaders, the teachers, who are being asked to approach this really important, essential task of training up this next generation in a culture that is counter-Christian, that is just saturated in alternative worldviews. And we say, hey, go do this. This is really important. And we don't always equip them. And so as teachers, those teachers look at their administrators and they say, okay, but how do I do this? And the administrators are like, I just know we need to do it. And so what we found, and what I found, and this was the basis of my doctoral research, was that Christian schools are unique in the K-12 setting in that unlike a large district where everything is centralized down at the main office and there's some people whose job is fully and completely to just research best practices and think about how to make a school run well and accomplish their aims, Christian school leaders are the ones who, yes, they're tasked with the bigger vision and conveying that vision, but they're also plunging toilets and they're also driving buses
Oh,
and
yes.
creating schedules. Yeah, you guys know.
I
It's
called
that,
mine Bertha. I called Bertha my toilet plunger. She and I had many an adventure together.
yeah, and I'm guessing by the fact that you named the plunger, you had lots of quality time with Bertha as
Yeah,
well.
too much really.
Right. Yeah. So what we have just found in our research and what we just continue to just cry from the mountaintops is that Christian school leaders are essential to the efforts to create an environment that's just immersed in a biblical worldview, which is what we really need for our students to catch into. I don't know if buy-in is the best term, but to really believe in what this is that we say is true, and really follows the Deuteronomy principle of training them when they wake up and as they go and when they sit and when they stand and when they walk by the way. So, of course, paraphrased. So that is the core of what we're saying here, and what we do with Summit is one of the things we do is really work on supporting school leaders as they carry out this important mission.
Yeah, I think it's really important as you know, you talk to a Christian school leader and they say, "Of course, we are going to tie the Bible into everything." And you know, the term that's typically used is biblical integration,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, it always came across even to me as a teacher like, are we forcing the Bible into this conversation? Like, is that what, or do we go out and really look hard for how we find it? But I love you've used the word even when you were responding to this, that we're saturating our kids in a biblical worldview or immersing them as well. And it's it's almost like we need to just flip the switch. When I was thinking of this quote here, like a foreman tasked with stewarding a building project, it's really, it'd be really odd to just take the materials and say, oh yeah, this can be used to build a wall, this can be used to do this, but to ignore the blueprints makes absolutely no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you absolutely do everything according to those blueprints. And I love throughout this whole document, and we're going to get into more specifics and let you talk, but I just kept coming back to that phrase, saturated in worldviews, because that's one thing the world actually does really well.
Mm-hmm.
Is they get their message out there, and the kids know it better than we do sometimes. Right. And so that's where we need to really step up big time in this. Now, you had mentioned your doctoral program and how it really helped with the development of working with schools. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you would do?
Yeah, with Summit Ministries in particular, you know, my doctoral research fit really well with the mission of Summit Ministries, and I happened to work with Dr. Erdvig, as my doctoral chair, and had the great access to him and his expertise. And what we found was that what he was already doing in the field of biblical worldview immersion with teachers really lent itself well to the work that I was doing in my doctoral program. And so we were able to present the idea to Summit, and they were, of course, on board at just furthering this preparation. And so now we have the opportunity to work with schools. So what's a little bit different about what we do is that we are not the one and done, call us for PD, we come in for one day and we leave.
Right.
Because we kind of know how those things work in a school. I was an educator for many years. Those are great inspirational moments and we get excited about them for the moment, and then people leave and we're just stuck with these great ideas and not really the knowledge of how to do it. So when Roger and I work with a school, we actually will only work with them if they're willing to make a little bit longer of a commitment. And that commitment primarily is based on us working with their leadership team, because we know that school leaders, and I mean, this is your audience, right? They are the ones that are walking alongside these teachers when they're having the victories in the classroom and when they're having the frustrations of the classroom. And they're answering and fielding the questions and the concerns about how do we do this. So we want to support the leaders and make sure that they're equipped so that it's not just, hey, Maggie and Roger came in, they talked about this, they left. I don't know, send them an email. They'll tell you what to do. But that the leaders truly become equipped to support the immersive efforts. And when, again, to go back to what you were saying about immersive, because it's so much more than just what the teachers are doing in their curriculum maps or their lesson plans.
Right.
It really has to touch all aspects of the school.
You know, talking about your dissertation and your work there in your graduate studies, Maggie, we were able to celebrate recently with Dr. Shannon Juris, who graduated from Liberty University in her seminary, or Liberty University, I think through their seminary is how they currently have it set up, but religious institution studies, and her focus was so much on the creation of at least the understanding that the biblical worldview understanding that teachers have is not necessarily what was lined up with the mission of the school, and that further that the students, the world, as Matt notably said, the world understood the students looked at. The world understands that student worldview is developed significantly even by age 13.
Yeah.
But when it comes to apologetics training, especially, and being able to live out that life amongst all the different worldviews, that schools weren't necessarily giving significant attention to significant portions of biblical worldview or apologetics until much later in the biblical curriculum of the school. And here we hear from you. We heard recently from her. We are, may I just say, I'm so excited to hear about more significant graduate work taking aim at our Christian schools and taking aim at what we can do better. Not that we don't want to see all the schools around us grow and get better and stronger, but hearing that there are people invested in and wanting to even spend their, you are paying as a doctoral student to have your studies completed as you complete your own study. You are paying to be the critical researcher, but people are spending their own time, effort, and money on studying Christian schools out and studying this sort of thing out. And that's really exciting. I'm happy that we are in that place and that we're hearing more of it, and that you took yours and it could be an encouragement to somebody out there who's going through their work. You're turned yours and you're turning it into a second career, a different branch of the career God's had for you. That's exciting.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Yeah, and I think you're right that there seems to be a little bit of an awakening that's happening in Christian schools, and possibly in response to kind of what Matt had said about the culture's doing such a good job of immersing things of the students in a different culture, whatever it may be, that Christian schools have to sit back and say, okay, I don't think it's business as usual anymore. I think we have to do things a little bit earlier, and it is encouraging to see research happening in the Christendom to really further the gospel and doing what we're supposed to do to steward the calling that we have wherever it may be.
Absolutely.
Pause. No, I don't mean pause the episode. I mean, let's take a pause from the episode so I can talk to you about the Herzog Foundation. Mark and I are honored to partner with this amazing organization. Like the Christian Principles podcast, Herzog wants to see your school grow and be successful. To help you achieve those next steps, you will definitely want to check out the Herzog Foundation Institute. Whether you are looking for some quick online training or have the desire to grow with fellow educators at a conference, HFI has you covered. What's even better is that as long as you can get yourself to the many conferences offered throughout the year, Herzog will cover all the costs while you're there, including food and hotels. You really can't beat that. Head over to herzogfoundation.com and get yourself and your team signed up for some training today. What are you waiting for? Just one more thing before we get back to the episode. If Herzog has been a blessing to you and your school, would you mind sending us a message telling us how? We'd love to share that with others.
Okay, so in this flyer, that I imagine this flyer would go out to different Christian schools, and for our listeners, this would be coming across their desk at some point to try to get the school to perhaps invest in what Summit is doing, to reinvest in themselves. There's this graphic, I think it's on the 4th page, that is aimed at what seems like building out a house, but of course, I'm sure you're putting a different spin on it. So what are we looking at here? It says foundation, framework, infrastructure, trim out, and staging. So what are we looking at? What if our listeners were going to partner with, which I imagine at some point looks like hire Summit Ministries to come alongside and help them, what does this have to do with that?
Yeah, so this flyer actually is less of a sales tool, and it's really more of a resource.
Oh.
It's one of the things that we share with administrators as we begin kind of a coaching cycle.
It got me excited. I figured this would be definitely something to put out there. So that's...
Yeah, maybe I'll mention that to marketing. I don't know.
Yeah. My bank account number, you can send the royalties to for that.
Yeah, exactly. So this actually represents 5 distinct domains that emerged from the research that Christian school leaders really should consider. And you're right, it follows this building analogy, but it's not a sequential process. I would say that it is overlapping. There's some parallels because most of us don't have the luxury. Maybe it's a luxury, maybe it's a chore, I don't know. But most of us are not starting a school from scratch where we can begin at the very beginning and build the way up. So whether you want to think of this as a foreman, you could, or maybe even an inspector, but there's some distinct aspects of a building, of a structure that make it livable. And so that's what these 5 domains note. And so foundation, and I think you referenced this earlier, but foundation is really, when we look at our Christian schools, is what we're talking about when we think about our aims, whether that's a mission statement, a vision statement, our expected student outcomes. It's the things that we say that we're going to do. And just like in a structural building, it's going to provide the backbone that supports the weight of everything else that we're doing. And so it has to be solid. It has to be checked. You know, here in Florida, we have sinkholes, right? So you have to check the integrity of your foundation. Otherwise, you're in a really unsafe structure.
Is there like sinkhole insurance that you have to have? Because we have to have flood insurance over here. I imagine they probably do in Florida too. But is there like a sinkhole insurance? That's, by the way, that petrifies me. Thinking like the earth could... Who was it, Cora, who got swallowed by the earth? And like, I'm going to get Cora up in here if I go to Florida.
Yeah, I don't think that we have, I could be wrong. I don't think we have sinkhole insurance. Most insurance companies are pulling out of Florida in general, so I doubt that we have sinkhole insurance. But
right, there's our 1500th idea is how to make money on this podcast, is how to open up a sinkhole insurance.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But, you know, when we think about the foundation in our schools and we think about how we articulate our identity in the school through some of those foundational documents, they've become a little bit of a check mark for us. We know that we have to have, you know, our statements hung on the wall so that when our accrediting agency comes, they can see it. Maybe we have our people memorize them. But what we have found, and what is really supported by leadership theory, transformational leadership theory, is that employees, the teachers that work for us, the staff that works for us, they're more willing to get on board to do the things that we're asking when it is rooted in a vision that is greater than just a job. And in Christian schools, that's exactly what we're doing. We have a mission and a vision that gives us a greater purpose to just saying, hey, go punch the clock from 7:30 to 3:30 every day. The calling is even greater than our public school friends that are down the street, because we know that we are impacting eternity. So regular checks on how we're conveying our mission and our vision to our employees, to our students, and to our staff really emerged as an important aspect of what we need to do as school leaders. Then the second area, and again, not sequential, but the second part of that is the framework period. And just like the internal framing of a building, leaders have to be very strategic in how they design a program framework that supports biblical worldview immersion. And again, this was referenced earlier. I think all of your listeners, if they were asked, hey, is it important that we do biblical worldview in our schools? They'd say, oh yeah, of course it is. Like, that's what we're about. Okay, how do we do it? And that's where we find, and we found in our research and in my research, that there was a little bit of a humming and hawing that happened. But this particular area is very close to our teachers' hearts. I would say every school that we've gone to visit, there's always a teacher who says, hey, come here, Roger, Maggie, come here. What if my principal doesn't get it? What if they don't give me time to do this? What if my schedule doesn't allow this? What if our events are so loosely related to what our greater purpose is and it seems like a waste of time? They see these things. And that's where, as leaders, we have to strategically design a framework that supports biblical worldview immersion. Is there time and room for human flourishing, both from a student standpoint and from a teacher standpoint? So there's lots of missed opportunities for biblical worldview shaping that can happen in our schools if we're not regularly revisiting that and saying, all right, how can we take a step away from business as usual and say, let's create space for authentic discipleship to happen, for apologetics-based seminars to occur during lunch or during a specials hour. How can I get creative? And yes, probably create a little more work for me in order to create that immersive environment.
Now, another thing that when it comes to that kind of a thing, we as teachers are constantly trying to be flexible when it comes to, Johnny's not getting it, and so I've got to adapt. I've got to come up with a different way of communicating this to Johnny. But when we say, let's be more purposeful in our biblical worldview development, like the reaction tends to be, and maybe I'm unique, but what it looks like is, oh no, now I've got to create something new in order to do that, when in reality, it all goes hand in hand. And it's just, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a mindset, it's a perspective of, while we're doing this, while I'm adapting my lesson plan to help Johnny, let's discuss and let's have an opportunity to point back to how this all interacts and works with our relationship with God, our understanding of His creation, all these things. It's right there. It's there's not a lot that we have to create, but we just have to see it. We have to see it. And I that's what I'm picking up so far, is not so much the creation of brand new things. It's just opening our eyes to the opportunities that are staring us in the face.
Absolutely. Yeah, you absolutely hit that on the head. We actually sometimes look at each other, Roger and I, and are like, I feel like somebody's going to one day say, hey, this isn't that revolutionary, right?
Yeah, we're doing this already.
Ta-da.
Right.
Give me that money
but
back.
it's harnessing what we're already doing. And honestly, giving our teachers, giving ourselves as administrators some permission to not bear this massive load, thinking that it all rests on our shoulder, and that we can, like you said, not reinvent the wheel. But it really does go back to one of my favorite quotes, and Roger and I talk about this all the time, but Abraham Kuyper's when he says, there's not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry mine. And so if we really believe that it's all Christ, then that means it's not, hey, I'm already teaching history and I already do curriculum maps and I already do all of these things. Now you're asking me to add this thing.
Yeah.
You're saying all of this belongs to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So how is he revealed through it? And how can I make that clear to my students?
Yeah.
So that's the fun part, which really, it kind of leads us into the next two areas, the next two domains, which is the infrastructure and trim out. And we play on the word of in.
I gotta say that trim out sign, I thought that was
Yeah.
radioactivity over a sink. Now I realize it's a drain and like a basin. So
Yeah. Or a fan.
Or a fan.
And a bathtub. Yeah. I think there's a couple of ideas there, but
okay.
No fan. Oh, but so infrastructure and trim out really have to do with our role as school leaders and the work that we do. This is often the area that we want to live in the most. It's our people. How are we pouring into our people? And I think what's a little bit different about both of these, infrastructure is the one that we think of, I got to help equip them. I've got to work on training. I've got to work on PD. And there's some really important things that as school leaders, we need to remember about how to lead adults in a certain way. And there's so much research about leadership theory that helps us to have conversations. We want to train our teachers to be problem solvers, to be thinking through these things on their own, and not to just become reliant upon us to give them the answer. That's when we get fatigued as leaders, right? But what we're finding is that, every leader we talk to is like, I can't find teachers. Mm-hmm. I'm struggling to find teachers with a biblical worldview. They can't explain the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
There's, and then just the pure shortage of things. So we're finding that schools that are really invested in their mission and in creating a biblical worldview are having to reevaluate how they've done professional development and what they're going to require of their people. So new teacher orientation may not just be Fax RunWeb or whatever the LMS is. A lot of it is worldview. Mm-hmm. It's how am I going to build the worldview of my teachers, because they can't give what they don't have.
Right. I got to park on that for a second. So it's just in the limited sample size that you've seen, I'm very interested. I think our leaders would be too, our listeners would be as well, to hear. So are you hearing more of a call for schools to open up the breadth of the sort of teacher they would take? When I say that, I mean perhaps we had schools that were part of a church ministry, and so it was you were members of that church, or maybe it was part of a church ministry, so you were members of that church, and maybe a few of life in the practice around, or is it more of an independent school where they're willing to take a broader representation of even who they otherwise would have, and then they act like a seminary themselves doing biblical training? Is that is one of those kind of what you're talking about, or is it more of the opposite? It's so important, we're being extremely careful in only bringing on candidates that we don't have to do that with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's both.
Oh, okay.
I think that schools want to do the second one. They want to say, we want to be so firm about this. But the reality is they just need a warm body.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible to say, right? Yeah. That we don't want to admit that sometimes we're looking at one application for an opening, right, and that's it. So what schools are saying is not that they're going to accept whoever, no matter what they believe. There's still a fair amount of vetting. But what they're finding is they have a lot of baby Christians coming in. And so they're almost assessing where people are and then saying, now I need a plan to develop them spiritually. So that goes back to your idea of almost a little mini seminary of how do I grow them spiritually and professionally.
Oh man, and that brings up so many other questions about even the secular forefathers of educational philosophy would say that teachers have to be role models. Teachers have to be good citizens if they don't have a religion. If it's even just secular, forget the sacred. This was a clear understanding, and here we are talking about bringing people on that we realize are. I like the immature in their belief, milk drinkers, not meat chewers in the word. Not that any of us have reached some sort of stage where we don't have to do both, obviously, but that's a whole nother pod. I think that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. That's huge
my
right now.
my brain was automatically going down. Oh, there's another hire, the Christian school chaplain of
of the teachers, of the
of
faculty,
the teachers,
and staff.
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But so many of the campus pastors and the directors of spiritual formation, they will tell you, I'm ministering to teachers too. I mean, it's just the reality of what they're doing. And heads of schools, principals are having to reconsider. And that's why this infrastructure was so important. It's not just the weekly devotions that if you've been in Christian education for a couple decades, we used to go on Fridays for our devotions, and we'd probably work through a book of the Bible, and it was valuable. But now we're having to have some fundamental conversations and plan for those conversations. And that is some of the work that Roger and I do. We come in, not necessarily teach all the fundamentals, but we do lay a foundation about really the biblical meta narrative. You've got to understand creation, fall, redemption, restoration.
Yeah.
You've got to understand the basis of what we do. And then really that's an entry point in saturating all of our instruction in a biblical worldview, because we can kind of place that within that biblical meta narrative. So that's a big part of the preparation, but the trim out kind of comes alongside that for administrators. And I love talking about this one because this is generational fun for me. I don't know if you've seen any of the little fun memes or imagery about the different generations and how the bosses and the employees are. Well, the trim out is all about relationship. It's all about relationship. We have just found time and time again that the people that are working in our schools, they need and want to have a relationship with whoever is leading them. And I think back to some of my early supervisors who were really transactional and were like, hey, you cut your leg off, but can you be here by 9? Like, let's get the day going, right? And
let's go. Those personal days are not just for fun. Let's go.
That's right. Yeah. But we know that in order to really access the power and the intention of everything we've put, going back to this building analogy, everything we've put in place. So we've framed it, we have this foundation and the infrastructure, we have all this wiring that's coming out of the ceiling or out of the wall. Well, if it's just coming out of the wall, these wires, you can't really use it for anything. You have to have some type of way to access that power. And that's relationship. Mm-hmm. And as principals, and you guys know, you talk to principals, you guys have been there, our to-do lists are so long that we often can resort to the management aspects of our job and not the relational aspects of our job. And what we leave on the table is accessing all the things that we've put in place in order to make our school run well and for biblical worldview immersion to happen, because our teachers are not getting what they need from us as far as that relational connection. And we know that that relational connection is so important, teacher to student. Mm-hmm. So if we're not modeling that and we're not filling that with them, then we're going to see that breakdown most likely later. So I used to tell a couple of people that I mentored along the way as they came up into leadership, I used to tell them I would, usually on a Friday, probably once a month, I would sit and think about who I have the greatest gap to bridge in the relationship area between myself and my teachers. And that's who I would make my focus for the next month.
I love that. Everybody write that down. Take out your notepad, take out your pen, write it wherever you are. If you're driving, don't do that. Don't do that if you're driving. Everybody else, take what she just said, write it down, get intentional. I love the intentionality of that.
Yeah, because, sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, so I don't want to make it sound like I did it all right. there was that teacher that I was like wanted to dive under the desk because I just didn't have the time at that moment. I had a long task list. So I was like, I don't have time for this right now. So I really had to be intentional about countering that, because that is when we tap into the things that we really need, and that they're willing to then say, okay, I'll go to another afternoon PD session and work on my biblical worldview, because they have that relationship with us.
Yep.
So that leaves our last stage, our last thing. This is kind of the fun place, but this is really the essential, a very essential area. This is the staging area. And, my husband is a custom home builder. He builds homes. He builds beautiful homes. But he works with somebody who does the 100-Day Dream Home show on TV, on HGTV. And so he's been really close to the production of that, and they've talked to him about doing it. But on the TV show, when they reveal a home, it's full of all this furniture and all these things on the wall, and it looks beautiful and it's homey, and you're like, I want to be in that space, right? Because there's like a physical element. Mm-hmm. Then when they're done filming, they take it out, and it's just a structure, right? It's just a completed home, and it just looks empty. But so the staging is what makes it ideal for flourishing. It's when we can say, yeah, I can imagine myself living in that place. So we have to consider as leaders, not just the physical space. We have that one teacher who buzzes into the office every day at 2:00 to say she still smells something in her room, right? And we feel like we've looked. But we have to remember that the physical space is so important that even if we've already looked, it should be a priority for us to make sure that that space feels like a home, feels like a place they want to be for the teacher and for the students. So there's the physical element, and then there's also just the happiness element, the well-being construct, so to speak, that is so important for our teachers. We think of it as the cherry on top often, like, well, they can eat the ice cream sundae without the cherry on top, right? But it's actually not that way. They really need to feel the love, so to speak. And I had a head of school that I worked for at the end of my time in a public school, and he was just brilliant. The whole first year he was there, he would not do any changes, which we know, leadership theory 101, right? Don't make any big changes the first year. But I was so impatient. I was like, let's get this show going. So year 2, he's like, all right, I'm ready. And he's like, here's what we're going to do. 2 things. First, I'm going to remodel the women's faculty bathroom. Second, I'm going to make a coffee shop for the kids. And I was almost frustrated with him because I was like, no, we've got all these big problems. But let me tell you, he has not had buy-in issues since, right? The female staff, they love him now. The kids, there's a relational aspect that says, okay, you care enough about me in those things that are little but big, right? My well-being, how I feel living in the space, to make that important. And so these are things that we know, like you said, Matt, like these are things that are not revolutionary, but that we found when we sit and talk with administrators, they're just like, yeah, but my to-do list, and I forgot to think about how to make this better.
That's awesome. Man, I wish we didn't have to keep rolling, but we got to keep rolling. Listen, Maggie, thank you so much for walking through those 5 with us. These are the 5 domains or areas of leadership consideration when we're talking about the framework of leading biblical worldview. And this is what you studied, and this is what you're putting into action now, you and Roger, you and Dr. Erdvig. That's exciting. If our listeners wanted to get up with you, how long is your wait list? What would you say? Do they contact you? What do they do? If our listeners are like, hey, I'm interested in what Summit could do, I'm interested in some of these resources that Summit will make available, what should they do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so first I would say there's just a lot of free resources that are available to teachers and leaders. So visit Summit's website. They're going to find an area for educators that has a lot of different information on the website. There's a form there that they can contact us with an inquiry, with a question, with a comment. So that's one way to just get in contact with us. The other resource that's available to our educator friends and leaders is a newsletter that we put out monthly. And what we really try to do in that newsletter is tackle an issue that's important to educators from a biblical worldview, just some little food for thought, and then also highlight a really practical application of how things are being done in the classroom. Like we highlighted a teacher who's just a beginning teacher who's doing some great things on how do I assess biblical worldview in middle school science. So that has an accompanying podcast as well that they can just listen to that teacher, a really casual conversation. So there's free resources that they can get right away. And then depending on what they're looking for as far as partnership, would just kind of depend on when we can connect with them. But we are growing, our department is growing. And so we're looking for ways to just continue to partner with different schools beyond just the reach that Roger and I have as two individuals. So I don't have a perfect timeline for you, but I would say let us know. And again, we work both in a professional development capacity where we work with teachers while we are also working with the leadership team behind the scenes. And then we also do full consulting packages where we sit and we do strategic planning for biblical worldview immersion with schools. We help identify certain projects and that they want to tackle and partner with them in producing some of that and taking some of the load off of our Christian school leaders' desks.
Well, that's awesome.
Take advantage of it. Take advantage.
Yeah. And you said, Matt, I see you flipping the book around there. That
oh yeah.
There we go. The actual book. There it is, right there. Well, it's our starting point. You said free, and then you followed it up with free. And I'm sure that is going to be very interesting to our people. And then moving past that, of course. Thank you so much, Maggie, for coming on with us. We appreciate it more than you know. And with people out there, with ministries out there like Summit and others that we've been able to talk with, and the hearts that you have and the hearts that Shannon has had, that Dr. Joyce has had now, we are excited for the next generation of, well, I said next, I'm not that old, our generation of Christian school educators coming up and coming about.
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah. No, I wanted to say again that if you're tempted to think, oh, we do that great, like, what do you lose by just saying, let's see if this will help us do it better? I feel like we say this a lot on our podcasts because we do have excellent resources available to us. And so just do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, as somebody who loves the leaders that you guys minister to, one of the things that I found in my research talking to so many different leaders was they were really lonely. Yeah. They found that it was a little bit lonely at the top, that they felt isolated at times. And so one of the biggest rewarding parts of my job is to be able to just partner and be a friend and be somebody to bounce ideas off that's not looking to them for an answer. So we're privileged to be partnering with so many great educators across the nation.
That's awesome.
All right. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much.
That is great.
Thank you.
All right. It is time for our administrator spotlight. And I'm going to let Finn do this one. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, right?
Oh, there he is. Yeah, Finn. Yeah. All right.
He's been trying to talk the whole time. We'll let him talk now.
Yes. All right. Our administrator spotlight for this episode goes out to Ronald Longhofer, principal of Milford Christian School.
Milford Christian School up there in Milford, Delaware has been around for a while. We have been able to play them in the past in sports. I remember Miss Johnson was a longtime principal there, and Pastor Perdue has long been the I guess he'd definitely be the administrator and the pastor of First Baptist Church of Milford. First Baptist of Milford, I think, is the name. But we are excited to be able to recognize him. And he was really trying to come out to be at that Max Administrator's Retreat with us, but wasn't quite able to do so. So I want to make sure I told him we'd be praying for him soon. So, Mac, you want to go ahead and pray for Ronald? I think this is his first, maybe his second year in that role. He's not been in that role for long, so we are thankful for him. And he also does, of course, the song leading. Much as you do. What is up with that? With teachers, with admins who do that?
Yeah, only the best people can. So, all right, let's pray. Father, we do thank you for Pastor Longhofer and his contribution up there in Milford. And I know for many years in a pastoral position, now as he's leading the school there, I pray that you give him wisdom and guidance, and especially as we talk about in this episode, the biblical worldview, I just pray that you would give him the resources and tools that would allow him to lead his faculty and his staff and his students into a closer relationship with you. I just pray that you would encourage him as we draw to a close of this school year and continue pressing on, all for your honor and glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Well, everybody, thanks for growing with us today.
Before you go, please be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, on Spotify, be sure to tap the star icon near the top and select the number of stars you'd like to give us. We'd be so grateful for 5. On Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the ratings and review section and then tap write a review to share your thoughts of the podcast. Thank you.